Welcome, everyone. Please feel free to share your name, drop it in the chat, where you're from, your district, your school, and your role. Please feel free to drop that in the chat and welcome. We're so excited to have everyone over here tonight. Brilliant. So,
are those of us on the West Coast of the United States this morning?
It's morning for some, afternoon for others, evening for the rest of us. And Moira, nice to see you. Thanks for sharing. Let's jump in. If you want to share where you're from, your district, your school, your role, it will be awesome to see you joining us. We've got a couple of attendees coming in. Fantastic. And we're going to introduce the team very quickly, very soon. Hi, Christine, nice to see you. Wonderful to see you again. Brilliant. Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have everyone join us over here today. So Wendy and Suzanne join us. It's really going to be an exciting time we get to spend with each other. So anyone else, any of our attendees joining, please share where you're from. It's so wonderful to see everyone. Hi, Silke, nice to see you. Brilliant. Hi, Laura. Brilliant. And in a minute, we'll get going. So wonderful to see so many participants coming and joining. And yeah, we'll get going in just a minute. Fantastic. Cool. I think we've hit 8 o'clock. 10 a.m. Different time zones over here. But we'll get going. And first of all, just a massive welcome to everyone. We're so excited to see such a diverse group of attendees joining us here today. We're really excited for this topic of let's get real about SEL, from data to implementation, to really try to take you on a journey from the data part of SEL all the way through to the implementation, to actually making actionable change in your schools, in your district, wherever you are. And a massive thank you to Suzanne and Wendy for joining us. I'm going to share a little bit about them now. But really, just thank you so much for joining us to show up, to learn over here today. We're so excited to have you. So to introduce everyone, many people in the chat have introduced yourself. And if you haven't, please take a moment to introduce yourself. But first of all, my name is Ari Poyers. I actually come from South Africa. So if you don't understand the accent, I deeply apologize. But my name is Ari, and I work for Kelvin for the sales and education department. I'm on the sales and education team. Myself, I'm an instructional coach, an educator, an SEL enthusiast, and I really love the work of SEL. To introduce the other people that you'll see on the webinar is our team, Holly and Justin. They're our CSM team, our customer service managers. So if you are joined with Kelvin, you're going to see them a lot. They're going to be helping you out with anything that you need regarding Kelvin. And just to speak a little bit about them, Holly has a PhD and loads of experience in higher education, and Justin is a CSM expert and former teacher. To go over to our extremely wonderful guest today, we've got Wendy Baron, who's an SEL consultant, an author, researcher, and the co-founder of the New Teacher Center. Really, Wendy and Suzanne have so much knowledge to share and give with us, and you can just see by the experience. And Suzanne, she's a social, emotional, academic development coach, as well as so many other things, wears so many hats. So it's so wonderful to see everyone here to join us today, and we can't wait to learn with you all. Fantastic. What we're going to look at now is the 3 goals which we have for this webinar today, what we really want to achieve. And really what we're trying to do over here today is take you from data to implementation. take you from understanding Kelvin's role in developing a systems approach to social emotional learning. We want to help you understand how Kelvin can play its role in assisting you in this work. Then what we're going to do is explore some dimensions for pulse surveys. We see so many clients who come and this work is extremely messy. It's difficult to start. And we want to help you start this work and then get supporting resources, have resources to actually implement your plan. And lastly, number 3 is we want to challenge you to consider the applications for your context. We would love to have this space as a bit of a think tank for all of us to share a couple of ideas, for everyone to participate and to really think about how we can go and share this in our specific context. So this is what we want to achieve today. We're so excited for everyone to join the journey. And because we are SEL educators, I'm going to pass it on over to Suzanne to do one of our 3 signature SEL practices. So over to you, Suzanne.
Well, hello and good morning. And it's great to be here. And I see we've got a wide variety of participants joining us this morning. You can see the Boys and Girls Club and some SEL coordinators and some of our colleagues from across the street and administrators, even some teachers, it looks like. So we just want to start with our welcoming ritual, and we're going to start with a grounding. So if we could go to the next slide. And just take a moment to transition into this space. So I want to invite you to just sit up in your chair or stand up straight, whatever's comfortable for you, and maybe relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, put your feet on the floor, and then just take a conscious breath in and out. So just a slow, deep breath in, and then a slow exhale out. And maybe make your exhale a little longer. Another deep breath in, slowly. Deep breath out. And just notice how you're feeling as we settle into this space. Just take a moment to transition to be here in the present moment. And we know that one of the strongest and most effective physical practices to become calm and come into the moment is through our breath. We can use it at any time. And it's just nice to take a moment to settle in. I'm going to hand it over to Wendy from there, who's going to do the second part of our welcoming ritual, the connector.
All right. Well, it is so great to be here, and I wish I could see everybody's faces. I can see them in my mind's eye. So I'm really happy to be here with you all. And as Suzanne said, we just want to connect the social emotional learning with Kelvin. And we're going to start off just by revisiting the framework with 5 social emotional learning competencies. Our source is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the competencies of cultivating self-awareness, our ability to know what we're feeling, what we're thinking, be able to reflect on our strengths, our values, our mindsets, and our ability to emotionally regulate, manage our emotions, our thoughts, our actions. And then in the green, our social awareness and relationship skills. And then the yellow is our ability to make responsible decisions. That happens within a context. It happens within a pro-social learning environment in the classroom, the school environment, and then the community at large, and of course, families and caregivers. So that's kind of what we hold in mind is this is our framework. This is where we're heading towards. And then Kelvin, on the next slide, we want to invite you to look at the dimensions that the Kelvin survey includes. So in the center, you can see that maybe we can collect some data about bullying or cyberbullying, the climate, the cultural and linguistic competencies, relationships, growth mindset, self-efficacy. So you can look at, these are the dimensions that we can collect information, qualitative information, on an ongoing basis of our students, our staff, and our families. So just to get started, we were curious, what kind of information are you already gathering on a regular basis? So it might be quarterly, it might be semester-wise, but we're not talking about like annually. We're talking about information that you can use to then guide your responses to students, families, and staff. So number one, if you would put a number one in the chat and a dash, and what kind of information are you gathering from your students in your context in any of these dimensions? Let's just see. We should have a drum roll. Music. Most of those dimensions. Wow, thanks, Christy. Okay. Safety, yes. Okay, so climate surveys, yes. School connectedness, awesome. All right, empathy interviews, wow. Awesome, so you guys are not new to collecting qualitative information from students, and that is so important in order to give them voice and agency in their education. So let's look at staff. So number two, what kind of information are you collecting from your staff? And qualitative information, it might be the same as this, the climate, connectedness, our sense of safety. What are you collecting from staff members?
We'll have to try and get that drum roll next time.
I know, what were we thinking? All right, you're in our group. Two, we haven't used the survey that, yes, so that is very typical, is we're really focused on students and not quite as much on staff. Oh yes, self-management, emotional safety. I mean, we know that staff members are experiencing a lot of stress and have been talking about it, and our responses to their stress may be very varied. Okay, safety needs, belonging. Yes, that sense of belonging. A little information about belonging and connectedness is that is just a number one protective factor for the health and well-being of our adults. So that's a really important one. Okay, finally, three, families. What information are you collecting on a regular basis? So it could be quarterly, 3 times a year, twice a year, but that you're using this information to guide your responses. What are we getting? Oh, Christie's pulse. Oh, focus questions relating to a presentation you delivered. Okay, that's another great thing about Kelvin, is you can create your own survey questions. All right, what are we hearing about for families and caregivers and parents? And thanks so much for putting your ideas in, because it's really going to help us shape this towards what you might want and be interested in. All right, I'm going to leave this up for just another few seconds. Thank you, Crystal. Safety, school participation, relationships, climate, academic support. So it's a focus this year. Yes. Yeah, that participation. Are we having parents as partners? Are we having them as, we're letting you know what we're doing? So being able to survey families is really helpful in creating partnerships. And Justin, thank you. You just put our file in for folks to be able to use. This is a PDF of our slide deck, so you can follow along. And I'm going to turn this over to Holly, who's going to give us an overview of, well, what is Kelvin education and what does it offer? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And again, I want to echo the sentiments of thanking you all for sharing your ideas in the chat of how you're using Kelvin or what data you're collecting. And at Kelvin, we really are offering support for you to help understand your students, your staff, and what's going on at your school environment. So we, from using Kelvin, can help you get the data that you need, and even down to a more granular level. And to just kind of preface about what Kelvin is about, where we came from, we like to share a little bit of the story of two of our co-founders, Baxter and Zach. And so you'll see their academic profiles here on the screen. And from what we see from their academic profiles, they look excellent. They're performing very well academically. They have great extracurriculars and pretty good test scores across the board. But what we don't see here is some of the struggles underneath that are happening in the background. And a lot of academic assessments just don't pick up those pieces. So this is where Kelvin has kind of strived to fill that gap. And what we found out from Zach and Baxter is while they were performing well academically, they both dropped out of high school because of some of these issues and struggles in their family life. And so with Baxter, his mom was a stay-at-home, or not a stay-at-home, sorry, a single mom working full-time, and he had to fill in the gaps and help with his siblings. And so that made it difficult for him to be connected and be fully present at school and develop that sense of belonging. And then similarly, there was some family stability issues for Zach, who had moved to 7 different schools in a short span of time. And while he was doing his work and doing just fine academically, he didn't feel as though anyone noticed him or cared about him. And again, was not developing that sense of belonging and connectedness that we see as a protective factor at school. So given kind of that background of two of our co-founders and what they were thinking in terms of helping others, I'm going to turn it to Ari to explain how this connects to what we're doing at Kelvin.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Holly. And really, thank you everyone for sharing. And thank you, Susan, for the little mindful breath. I always need those when I speak in public. So thank you. I really appreciate it. But definitely just to kind of speak and build on what Holly was saying is that's really the why behind our company and what we do. I have my personal story at school, and many of us have our personal story. That's actually why I became an educator. But specifically in the work of social emotional learning, because social emotional learning, as many of us know, it has these incredible benefits. These benefits go beyond, beyond anything that we could have ever imagined. They help us with the academic achievement, absenteeism. We always imagine if Zach and Baxter would have had that social emotional support, those couple of social emotional practices, what would have actually happened to them? Maybe their life would have been fast-tracked in a different way. These are possibilities I always think about. And when I think about for myself in school, what would my life would have been like with social emotional learning practices? How would that have looked? So this is really why we do the work that we do, is because we care about people's success. And this is why, kind of when we start talking about Kelvin, this is what we want. We want to understand what these students need. So what I'm going to do now is present you a big picture about Kelvin and, kind of set the context for this webinar. So many of you might be familiar with the Kelvin, the back end over here, what the data looks like. And we're going to kind of build a bit of a story over here. Is you've got a school, you've got a district, and we want to do a survey measuring the dimensions of school belonging, something along those lines, school culture, climate, school belonging. So we go and we ask these 5 questions. We ask, my teachers care about me? Do you feel like you belong at the school? Are you happy to be at the school? How safe do you feel when you're at the school? And students respect one another in the school. Quite a basic survey. But when we look at it, we're actually measuring two things. The teacher-student relationships, as you can see over there on the top, and the peer-to-peer relationships, okay? And when you go actually take a microscope and put it on these individual dimensions, you can see over here at the top is my teachers care about me. This is telling us a story. The teachers care about the students at the school. There are strong student-teacher relationships. This is what the data helps us understand. And when you drop over there to the bottom, how safe do you feel at the school? or students respect one another at the school, you can see that 43 and 38% respectively. And those little red arrows over there are indicators that they've dropped down 7% from the last time you admitted the survey. Okay, and what you can do, remember with Kelvin, is you can go and put a survey, you can do a survey multiple times, a pulse survey multiple times, and this is showing us from the last survey it's dropped 7%. And what we can see when we go and we take a look at this is, and we're going to see the frameworks of how to deal with this as we go through the webinar today. But what you can see over here, just from our basics, is what we need to work on. We need to take a moment to reflect on the student-teacher relationships, and we need to take a moment to what's going right over there. And we need to take a moment to reflect on the peer-to-peer relationships and what's not going right over there in that space. So once we understand this and we've got a bit of a big picture, what we can also do is we can go and look at the individual. So on the next slide, what you'll see over here is the individuals. Now, 2 individuals I want to focus on. This is our participants report, where we can really get granular about the individuals in our schools, in our district. And this can be extremely helpful to the social worker or the psychologist in the school. You can see over there Carissa and Ubaldo right in the middle. Now, Carissa and Ubaldo, you can see on the right-hand side, have dropped 91% from their last survey. These students are not doing well and they are at risk. Okay. You've also got another way that we understand that risk is they've turned on the request to speak to an adult function, and they've requested to speak to an adult. They've gone and they've said, we need to speak to someone. We're obviously not feeling okay. And these are ways that Kelvin can really help us through this work and really help put a spotlight, as we said, on those stories like Zach and Baxter. We can try and understand what's going on in Ubaldo and Carissa's space. So this is really what we want to share today, is how do we actually deal with this? How do we take this data and make actionable change? So from here, I'm going to hand over to Suzanne to really establish a systems approach to SEL. So take it away, Suzanne.
All right, thank you. Well, as Ari said, we can get this data. So how do we incorporate this data into a systemic social and emotional learning approach? So Wendy and I are out here in California, and like many other states, California has a commitment to social emotional learning, and we have an initiative through CalHope and the Department of Health Care Services through the Student Support Services Department that is supporting our work in California across the state. So we're going to talk just a little bit about that. And then one way that we help to implement with schools and districts is using the 4 pillars of systemic SEL. And digging a little deeper into there, we use inquiry cycles for continuous improvement. So we're going to talk about each of those briefly. So first, in terms of our statewide SEL community of practice, throughout the state, we have a community of practice for social emotional learning, and it's going on in every county in the state. And Wendy's been working on this since 2018, this initiative that's been going for quite a while right now. And we're really looking at how do we support student and staff health and well-being through social emotional learning throughout the state. And we really got accelerated during the pandemic, and we've had a lot of fires out here, which also impacted us across the state. So that's part of where we get a lot of support, through CalHope and through our state capital in Sacramento and our district there. So if we go to our next slide, one of the ways that we support implementation in schools and districts are using the 4 pillars of systemic social emotional learning implementation. And this comes to us from CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. And I know it's a little tiny, but I'm just going to walk you through the 4 different focus areas. But the first one being the focus area 1, build foundational support and plan. And this is where we want to get a sense of what the foundation is in each school or district or organization, and take stock of what they already have in place, and maybe look at what type of research-based program they're looking to implement. And then focus area 2 is strengthen adult SEL, which is critical, that we need the adults to have an understanding and foundation of SEL in order to explicitly teach it and integrate it into their practices. And then the third area is promoting SEL for students, where we want to make sure that we're explicitly teaching skills and strategies of supplying those to students and integrating them into the curriculum. And And with that, just like we would do for any academic area, we want to monitor what are our students' strengths, what areas do they need support, where do they need help? And that's some of the data that we can get from Kelvin is, you know, Holly and Ari explained that sometimes we don't actually look at them. What do our students really need? And that leads us to reflecting on our data for continuous improvement, focus area 4. And how do we actually gather data so that we can support students, look at what's going well, what are we doing well, and what are some areas that we need to dig in for a little further implementation. So with that, I'm going to have Wendy share a little bit more about that focus area 4. What do we do for reflecting on our data?
Thanks.
Right.
Well, I think the interesting fulcrum is when we engage in continuous improvement cycles. And so we're going to posit engaging in inquiry cycles, either as a whole staff, as a community, in grade level teams, department teams, counseling teams. You'd have to decide in your context. But it would start with collecting some data. And again, this is qualitative data. Now, with academics, we're collecting data all the time. And so we know where students are academically. We don't always know where students are emotionally and how they're feeling in their classroom. Do they feel safe? Do they feel a sense of belonging? Because we all know if a student is experiencing threat, they're not going to be able to learn at the same pace as if they are feeling relaxed and safe in their classroom. If they have something going on, if something traumatic even has happened at home, as Ari said, students can ask for help. You know, we need to know those things right along with their academics, because, you know, learning is deeply tied with our emotions and our behaviors, our outcomes of our emotions, our emotional state. So we want to decide, what do we want to learn about? What are we curious about? And then after we have a pulse survey, we take time to analyze and reflect on that. And I'm going to take you through a little scenario. And again, this could be in teams or it could be whole school. And then from that, once we analyze the data, then we plan. So what are we going to do? What might we try? What resources do we have? And finally, we want to implement those together as a team, as a group, and monitor how is it going so we can have rapid improvement cycles before we do our next Kelvin Pulse survey. A lot of folks do surveys, you know, quarterly, or again, it might be 3 times a year, 4 times a year. And it's slightly different because we can disaggregate by students and groups of students. So let's look at what it might look like in practice. So in Butte County, and again, Suzanne said we have a statewide initiative. So each of our county offices is working with 3 focal school sites and districts. And so in Butte County, they've agreed that all 3 of their focal districts are going to implement these same 3 surveys 3 times over the course of the year. So here's an example of their staff, their educator survey. So this is what they're looking for. I'll just give you a moment. Okay, and you have a copy of this so you can dig into it more later. Then on the next slide, we see, what are they asking their students? So 3 times over the course of the year in Butte County, in these 3 districts, all the students are answering these questions. All right, and finally, 3 times over the year, families, parents, and caregivers are responding to the survey. Okay, so the next step in an inquiry cycle is we're going to analyze and reflect on data. So we pulled out some of the data that Ari shared earlier. And here are just some questions that could drive the discussion. Again, it could be in teams, it could be whole staff. So before we even look at the data, we'd be asking, what are some predictions we might make about each of these dimensions? What are some assumptions we might be coming in with? And then we want to look at it, like as Ari said, look what popped out right away. It was the, how do you feel at school, and students respect one another? How safe do you feel and respect? What's surprising or unexpected about that? Notice any patterns and trends? Oh, is there a relationship between safety and respect? That would be an interesting question for me. And then, what haven't we yet explored? We might want to look at the subgroup data or the individual data. And then what conclusions can we draw? What inferences can we make? So this is from a book, Data-Driven Dialogue, Bruce Wellman and Laura Lipton. If you have not read that yet, it's really super helpful in thinking about how you would facilitate dialogue around data. So with that, so here's our first part, our second part actually, and over back to you, Suzanne.
Thanks. So as Wendy said it, we get the data, we're looking at it, and we might think like, okay, now what do we do that we have this data? So we're looking at what are some of the strengths that we see in our students, what's going well, maybe what we want to do to reinforce that, and then pick a focus area. So in the example we saw that there was a low level of safety and respect. So let's say we choose that we want to work on respect first. That was the lowest. So we think about what do we want to do when get together with our team and brainstorm, what are some solutions, are some ways that we might want to implement learning about respect or supporting students learning about respect, and what does that look like? So that might be in a leadership team, or we might have grade level teams or department teams that might spend some time brainstorming, thinking about how are we best going to support students. And in particular, we might use that data ability to go down a little bit deeper and be more granular, like are there particular groups of students that need support, or specific students that need support, or is there a group that's requesting, they're all requesting to have some support? So we could use that there. So that's part of our cycle of inquiry. And then we would move on to thinking about how are we going to monitor our progress. So first of all, what are we all going to agree that we're going to do so that we have some consistency and fidelity with implementation? So what are our agreements? What are we all going to try? Are we all going to do an explicit lesson? Are we all going to integrate? We had one group that worked on wanting to create a core breathing practice every day with their team. So first they got some baseline data, like how students were doing with self-management or self-regulation, and how often there were classroom disruptions. And then they agreed to teach some lessons from a core breathing curriculum and implement core breathing every day, talk a little bit about our brain and stress and the stress cycle. And then after some time, look at what's the data, has what we're doing making an improvement. Or we have another district that's working on increasing emotional vocabulary with staff and students and families. So they're looking at what do staff and students know about recognizing and labeling emotion. And then they're implementing a monthly curriculum where they're focusing on increasing emotional vocabulary, and then planning to look at like what's being effective as they go. What type of lessons are being effective? What type of supports are effective? So we want to make sure that our efforts are making a difference. So that's one way we can use our pulse surveys, our data that we're collecting around staff, students, and families. So with that, we started asking, what data are you collecting? And now we're wondering, like, what might you be curious about collecting? At the bottom of this slide, there are the dimensions that we have from Kelvin, the bullying and cyberbullying, climate of support for academic learning, cultural linguistic competency, and so on through there. So as we've gone through this, when you're thinking about it, what is something you would like to learn more about from students, educators, staff, family, and caregivers. I have to say that one of the schools we worked with last year was really looking at what do families understand about social emotional learning, and what was their understanding of what it was, and how they were respected or included in the school community. I mean, that was just an interesting place to start, like really with the families. But what are you curious about? So if you could either feel free to unmute and share out loud, or share in chat. What's got your curiosity piqued right now? I see growth mindset and understanding how their actions affect others for educators. Yep. So much of our
I think that's something that we've actually been chatting about as a team, is, promoting those teacher surveys, the educator surveys. Is like we've touched a little bit on today about that adult SEL, and how do we kind of, facilitate the well-being of our teachers. And definitely to reflect on that for a moment is understanding, our teachers, are we modeling a growth mindset, which can be very difficult, and, around, just the adult to student educator well-being, which is also just, are your teachers managing it? As I think Wendy mentioned in the beginning, it's been a tough time the last couple of years, and in general, educators have been there. I've felt burnt out. I think many of us have been there who've been educators. Yeah, thanks. And you see about how to measure adult cultural awareness authentically. Yeah, that's definitely something that we're all very curious about these days. And I do want to, and I mentioned, I think when we think about this, like some of these are long-term goals, and in some ways we want to just know what can we respond to immediately. Like I know that Ari and team have mentioned that some schools do bi-weekly just mental health quick pulse check-ins to see what are the issues that come up. Like in our county, we had a very serious lockdown threat a couple of weeks ago, and that school had to do a lot of response across the county. It impacted our entire county, and just how to know what issues were up and how to respond to students and families around that, and staff too. See, school systems are interested in educator retention and collecting data about educator burnout. Absolutely, yes. How do we support our adults too? Well, feel free to keep those coming. This is great to get your input about what you're curious about, and how do we help support each other in supporting our wellness across the country and around the world. I think I'm going to turn it over to Ari, who can share a little bit about and Wendy, about some of our resources. So now we've got data, we've got a plan, and what resource do we have to support implementation?
Fantastic. So thank you, Susan. Really appreciate it. And our resources are extremely important. And, someone I've personally done some professional development on social emotional learning, and I've been a teacher in the classroom, and I know how difficult it is, to start with that, to start that breathing activity. In my own personal life, my journey with meditation, first trying to go into calm and to headspace, and then going over to that didn't work for me, and then I try to, and nothing against those apps, they just weren't up, it didn't have, they didn't work for me personally, and then going on to try to do more intentional, longer meditations, and then finally actually get into a space where I just try to do 3 breaths, 3 breaths intentionally before I do anything. And I've got my little breathing buddy over here, which I keep on the table next to me while I work. I keep on my desk just as a reminder, and sometimes during a meeting, I'll be feeling a little bit stressed, and I'll just open it up behind the screen. And that's my personal way of doing it. I've chatted to educators, some of them love the mood meter from Yale, that fantastic resource. Some of them find it overwhelming. Some are, teachers love meditation, as I've explained with myself, with my journey with meditation. And what we want to really do over here is provide you with an array of resources and really give autonomy to you as a district or as an educator, whoever you are, in the resources that you can use. So the first thing that we've got over here is the Kelvin toolbox.
Now, this can be a bit difficult to sift through to find what it is. It can seem high burden, but actually when you go and you've got data on what you're looking for, it can be a really quick and easy activity. There, on every single one of those dimensions, there really are some fantastic tier 1 and even potentially tier 2 resources over there, which you can delve into. So say, for example, you've gone and done that, we saw that our student-teacher relationships were great. You can go look how to reinforce those, and you can go look through the Kelvin toolbox over there. And let's say, for example, is you're struggling with, as we said before, the peer-to-peer relationships. You can go get those icebreakers, get something like that over there from our toolbox, which can help develop those relationships. That social awareness, maybe that's something that you can work from. So that's one of the examples of the resources which you provide. I'm going to hand over to Wendy right now to provide a couple more resources.
So many of you already know all that Greater Good Science Center offers. So you can find articles and videos and lessons and podcasts for social emotional learning, culture and climate, any of these particular areas that you might want to dig into more. And we have links in your slide deck that are just live, so you can just go right there. Now, a number of us in California have worked on a set of resources and modules through Greater Good in Education. Pamela McVeigh-Lally is on this call, and she was one of the co-leads on developing these modules. And so you just have to register as a California SEL user, and you can access all 6 of these areas for support. And we have research, lessons, videos. It's an amazing set of resources. Okay, the next one, actually, Pamela and I worked on this next one as well. And this is a California Educators Together website. And we've been really focusing on transformative social emotional learning with all of California as part of our Department of Education and CalHope grant work. And so again, you can see we have added a lot of resources that are open access. Anyone can use these from anywhere in the country, so please feel free. And then one more that you probably already know about is CASEL's website. So you can go there and, for example, if you're focusing with your district or a school site on the 4 pillars, you can use some of their self-assessments and planning guides and resources. So there's a lot that you would find there. And so back to you, Ari, for our final resource.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Wendy. I think there's so much over there. If we delve into it, it can be difficult, but if we delve into those resources, there's so much over there which we can use to support the educators around us and really support our students. So over here are a couple of Kelvin tools which you can use. These are ones that you can browse through and really look which one works for your specific needs. And one which I'll mention from there is the Kelvin webinars. Webinars like these have really been a resource on how to look at the data, how to set up, how to build, how to look at that cycle of inquiry. These are different things which we've touched on throughout the Kelvin webinar. So yeah, you can click on them. Holly just dropped the link in the chat. So feel free to browse through those and use them as resources. Fantastic. And to go on to our next slide, and one of our last ones, we're going to be looking at an optimistic closure. But before that is we want to take an opportunity for anyone to ask any questions that they have. We're then going to go on to the next steps to our optimistic closure. And lastly, we're going to send you some contact info, which you are more than welcome to contact any one of us. So right now we're opening it up to the floor. We saw a couple of questions which we'll track back to. But now if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We want to hear your questions. Suzanne, Wendy, can you see any questions over there that we missed along the way that we want to address?
Well, let's see. There was one earlier on asking about the CalHope grant and whether it's just students can be surveyed or adults as well. It's really up to you what you want to do. The CalHope, we will be having a statewide set of questions. We're not exactly positive if this will go through Kelvin. You've probably been hearing at the CalHope meetings that in February and then again in May, we're going to have students answer a subset of questions that'll take about 15 minutes. However, we are already using Kelvin in a number of the districts and schools that we've been working with, so it can be formative. It's an ongoing, we're interested in this. We notice this in our students. We want to get more information from them. Our staff has identified X as an area of focus. Let's get more information about that. So there's something specific for the CalHope grant that we'll learn more about. However, you can use it as often as you would like.
And just to really jump on that, Wendy, is exactly, if you've got access to Kelvin, you can send out student surveys, you can send out teacher surveys, you can send out family pulses as often as regular as you want. The whole system set up to help gather that data and make it manageable and to engage with it. So definitely, if you've got access to Kelvin, by all means, and we are here to help you as a team, create those surveys, build those surveys, work on them together. And that's that. I also see over here from Steve. He says, I came in a little late, so apologies if it's already been discussed. We are already administering UCSB's social emotional health survey, and the California Healthy Kids survey. Is Kelvin replacing these surveys? As so you're thinking of adding a third? And yeah, Wendy.
I can respond to that unless you wanted to, Ari.
Go for it.
Okay, so no, this is not a replacement. It would be a supplement. So for example, with the Healthy Kids survey in our county, we've decided to give that survey actually before Thanksgiving this year instead of at the end of the year, so it can be useful for us in guiding our responses. However, the Healthy Kids survey is not a disaggregated survey. It is required, and we do have more SEL questions that have been piloted over the past few years. So it's going to be a very valuable survey. Let's say what comes back to you in your aggregated data set is that your high school students are reporting a greater sense of sadness and disillusionment. And so, but you might want to know more, like what is underneath that? How do we want to know which students, which groups of students? You could use the Kelvin survey as a supplement. Now we know that people get survey tired, so you'd have to really think about how you want to position different surveys, like your universal screeners. But you can work with Kelvin, especially like universal screeners. We're working with a district that's adding those questions into the Kelvin survey. So you would talk with your lead from Kelvin and just think about how might you address what comes up in some of your other surveys if you're interested, or are there some groups that aren't surveyed and you're curious about what do they want and need? Anybody else? I mean, we have a lot of experts in our community here. Anybody else? Colleen, anybody want to add to any of these responses?
Yeah, and feel free to raise your hand. We can unmute you. We can put you onto the screen. Give that a minute. Yeah, and also just to speak to that point, exactly as Wendy said, is with Kelvin, you can get more granular and you can do it more regularly. You don't have to do it 3 times a year, once a year, twice a year. You can do it as a bi-weekly if you want. I saw some fascinating data about checking in with Culture Climate once a month. It really gives you a snapshot of what's going on. So that could be something that you'd want to do to get more regular data. And Kelvin definitely has the capability to help out with that. So fantastic. If there are any more surveys, I'm going to share the contact information right at the end. But right now, we're going to jump through. I can't see any more questions come in. So we're going to jump through to the optimistic closure and some next steps, because I feel like we all are community over here, and we really want to build that community of people who support one another. So what is one way Kelvin Pulse surveys might advance systemic SEL in your context? What do you think? Let's get a bit practical over here within your context. How might these Kelvin Pulse surveys advance systemic SEL? So feel free to share in the chat. We'd love to hear some ideas. And, even if you've seen someone use it in a certain way, use Kelvin Pulse surveys in a certain way, if you've got any ideas to share, please feel free to share them in the chat. And we're really excited to hear what this community comes up with. Fantastic. Thank you, Christy. Brings in the whole picture of the student, academic, behavioral, and social emotional needs. Fantastic. And definitely we've got the whole child over here to be more responsive in providing supplemental student supports. Fantastic. Wendy adding, one district we work with is especially interested in student hopes and dreams, supporting those and barriers. Brilliant. That's fantastic. Trying to help students find meaning in what they do. Brilliant. Fantastic. Wendy or Susan, do you want to speak to any of the comments that have been made?
Well, Suzanne, I'll give you a moment because I just was speaking. Is there anything you want to say first?
Oh, I was just thinking about that, when we're looking at the whole MTSS and when we're looking at all the domains and really addressing the whole child. And that's one of the things I think about is just how do we make sure that we're really looking at the relationship between feelings and emotion and being connected and feelings of belonging and part of the school culture, and how that directly impacts academic learning and how we see it manifest sometimes in behavior, and we don't always understand what's underneath, and how I think this is an opportunity to get to actually explore that and look at that, which is for many years has been ignored, or we really haven't had the science behind it, and now we do, and this is a way that we can get to that. So that's just kind of what I'm thinking about right now.
Yes, actually, I'm just going to build on what you said, because when we look at the MTSS framework, which most of us are working with, we see academic instruction, behavior instruction, and social emotional learning instruction as separated. And so we often think in siloed ways. Oh, now we're doing behavior. Oh, we're doing an SEL lesson. Oh, now we're doing our academic lesson. And I think that one fabulous outcome of using formative assessments is it helps us to think about the interrelationship of all of these. How are our emotions related to our academic success? How is how we're feeling in class, the sense of belonging, a sense of agency, a sense of voice? How do all of those, a sense of collaboration among all the students, how do those impact our academic success and our behaviors, so that we're not just teaching each one separately, we're also integrating that in our own lesson planning, our own leadership style, and our students are realizing, oh, they're all interrelated. So anyway, I found that as an important outcome. And the last thing I'll say is it really depends on the leader. So this can fall down quickly if the leader isn't making time within a staff meeting to actually talk about, what do we want to know? What questions are interesting? Okay, let's meet in our grade level teams or department teams or counseling teams or certificated or whatever, special ed teams, and let's look at these dimensions and think about, what do you want to learn? Because it doesn't have to be the same question school-wide. Suzanne was going to work at an elementary school. It changed a little bit, but the idea the principal had was she would meet with the grade level teams monthly to plan their surveys and then reflect and analyze on the results, and then plan lessons. Where would we go from here? What are we going to do with this? And that was going to be on a monthly basis. So we switched it a little bit because the principal has a new position, but that leadership has to be the steady Eddie to then come back to it and actually show interest in learning about the staff to meet their social emotional learning needs, because that leader is modeling what this looks like, and that it's important that we're going to use that information to support you, because we've heard teachers say, if you tell us one more time to do self-care without building it in to our work day, you know, it just doesn't make sense. So leadership really matters in making this really work. Okay, that's it. I'm really happy to be part of it.
Well, I mean, I could listen to you guys speak all day. And, you know, the most beautiful thing that I saw recently is, you know, just to speak to that last point is there opportunity to prioritize connection before content? And that kind of hit the nail on the head for me when, you know, do we have that opportunity? You know, I think many of us have been in that space as educators, and, you know, we're trying to go so fast and do everything. And, you know, now we've got SEL to add to you know, and it just all seems like one big mush, for lack of a better word, of things to do. But if we've got that support from that leadership, I know we can do this work together. And hopefully Kelvin can be that support, and hopefully we all can be that support to help, you know, build this community of people who can do this work. So on that note, I want to say a massive thank you to Wendy and to Suzanne for your time in preparing this, for really just you know, being such a support to us as the Kelvin team. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It's been such a privilege sharing and hosting today. So there are contacts. Feel free to reach out to us. Just feel free to stand the line and ask any questions if you would like. I don't know if Wendy or Suzanne, you've got any final remarks, but from myself and the Kelvin team, a massive thank you, everyone, for joining.
Just a thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining.